The next phase of the offseason is here. Let's get ready for it with a new week on the podcast daily. It is Monday. He's Jeremy Birmingham, and I'm Austin Ward. So the real work begins now. I don't really think that the Buckeyes ever really stop, Birm, but they're back on campus. Everyone is back, and the summer workouts begin now. So let's kick it around. Who needs to make the most out of the next 2.5 months before training camp for Ohio State?
Before we do that, I want to ask you something. You covered sports before I met you. You covered college football before I met you. I didn't cover Ohio football or sports before I started working in this job, now 13 years ago. Is there a sense that the offseason doesn't exist anymore? Or did I just have a different opinion of it because I wasn't covering sports and didn't know as much about the daily grind / minutia that happened between the end of the season and the start of fall camp?
College football, when I first started covering it, which is now almost 20 years ago, very much had an off season. And there were places that didn't even really care about covering spring football. I did it when I first started covering Wyoming because I was already down there to cover the end of the basketball season and could double dip. But even at Tennessee after that for me, and then when I first started at ESPN.com covering Ohio State, it was you must take your time off in May. There was no transfer portal. You don't have to worry about coming up with content and talking about offseason moves because there are none. The calendar has become much more, as you know, because of the prevalence of recruiting and because of the transfer portal and the attention on spring football and the coaching carousel. It has become more like the NFL with a 365-day attention span. And the unfortunate part of that in some ways is that there are still, because we're dealing with 18 to 21-year-olds and college football and not professionals, they aren't doing something 365 days a year, but the attention is on them that much.
Yeah, I just remember watching football and being a fan of it and thinking that unless somebody got arrested or something terrible happened, you didn't hear about anything from January through the end of July. And now, and thankfully, I'm not complaining because obviously that it's what we do for a living and it keeps us, engaged with our subscribers and viewers and all that stuff. But I just sometimes think about how crazy it is that it's the middle of May and I feel okay, what do we got to keep doing this? And here we are again. I mean, spring football ended 4 weeks ago and now we're talking, okay, let's get back into winter work or summer workouts. Who's next? But who's next? Who needs a big summer? Who needs a big, workout period? Who needs to take the next step? I'm going to say this name and it's going to be oh, come on, man. But I think it's CJ Hicks. And I don't know if he's got the inside track to be a starter at linebacker. I think the competition at linebacker heading into his third season is probably much different than he anticipated, even back in December with the transition of Sonny Styles into that role. And so now, if you're CJ Hicks and if you're Sonny Styles, one of you guys is going to have to really step up and become a surefire dude. And hopefully for James Laurinaitis and Ohio State, both of those guys take that challenge and elevate themselves. But I think even with what seemed like an ascending type of spring for CJ Hicks, I still think probably Sonny Styles is the guy that's going to be the I don't want to say safer bet to be the starter, at that spot come August, but I do think that he is probably pushing CJ Hicks harder than maybe anyone would have thought for a guy who never played linebacker before.
That's an interesting spot for him to be in, and it's an interesting pick because once you get past spring football, and part of the way that the summer calendar has changed from when I first started covering college football and even 5 or 10 years ago is they're still not going to be able to go do organized team activities with the coaching staff, but they do have an opportunity to meet with the coaches in a way that they didn't before. And so CJ Hicks and Sonny Styles can't go out and compete head to head. They're not going to be tackling to the ground. Obviously, they're not going to have pads on. There's not going to be many opportunities for them to do the work that they did in March and April. And when we're talking about the workout period, CJ Hicks physically already, he showed up on day one looking like a Ohio State linebacker is supposed to. So like, I certainly understand where you're coming from. Like they have to, both of those guys at linebacker have to take that challenge and I think assert themselves to be ready to play like a starter in August. Like, how are they? I don't know how either one of them could do that when they're both already so commanding physically. Like they just have to bide their time in some respects over the next 2 months to get to that point. And I think it'll be a good. We're supposed to have some availability with the coaching staff in the, if not this week, maybe by the end of May. Like that's a great question, I think, for James Laurinaitis. Like, what can CJ Hicks and Sonny Styles do in the summer to be ready to take on that position? Because like lifting weights and getting faster, they're already really strong and they're already really fast.
Yeah, but that's the problem. No one a year ago was under the illusion that Tommy Eichenberg or Steel Chambers was physically better than CJ Hicks. It's they are mentally prepared to play linebacker every snap, and so that's where CJ Hicks needs to continue to grow and continue to get more consistent. And as you mentioned, like he can meet with James Laurinaitis, so it's up to those guys. Now that the Ohio State staff will be off the road after this week that's starting now. So you have an opportunity to say, hey, coach, I want time with you. I want to break down film. I want like that sort of taking the bull by the horn in that respect is really, I think, how you make that leap.
Okay. The first one that for me comes to mind, Berm, someone you've known and followed that recruitment. We talked about him all spring in the right guard position. I think it's Luke Montgomery. He got a taste of that experience. We've talked about that. Ohio State trusted him and trusted his athleticism enough to put him out there in that Bison package and let him work as a true freshman. That's a remarkable tip of the cap to him and having the tools necessary to go out there and perform for a team that has national title aspirations. I think if this is true and Justin Fry would be, again, we need a mid-May update from the coaching staff on this. Like if the notion that he kind of hit a wall in the middle of spring camp is true, it seems like maybe that would be as just because of the physical development and maturing, because he is still only a year and a half into like being on Ohio State's campus and being a Power 5 national title roster member. So national title contender roster member. It's not a problem that he's not as physically developed as a third or fourth year player. But one of the things we've talked about is like, if he is going to win that job in August, I think it'll probably be because he needs to look a lot different, or could look a lot different perhaps in August than he does in the middle of May or he did in March.
Yeah. I mean, I remember having a conversation we were doing a snap judgments after I think practice 7 or 8. And the question was pretty much posited directly to Luke, like, are you ready to be the starter? And he said, I'm just trying to get through day by day. And, I think that the other part of that is something that maybe Bill brought it up or maybe I did, maybe you did. I don't know, but I know we talked about it. When you have one player that feels like they're dipping or hitting a wall, but then you have two other players in Carson Hinzman and Tegra Shabola that seem to be elevating, you have to wonder, is Luke Montgomery coming back down to the median, to the mean, or are those guys raising their game to the point where Luke, because he is inexperienced, because he had less opportunity to really develop a timeline wise, that they have decided that those guys have taken a step up. So I don't know which one it is, but physically, if you look at Luke at 6'4.5", almost 6'5", 310 pounds, like he looks like what you want a Big Ten guard to look like. So the question for him is the same as CJ Hicks, like consistency. Are you able to go out there and do it every single snap? And maybe maybe it is confidence, maybe it is the ability to be a little bit more prepared from a stamina / endurance standpoint. I don't know, but I know that Luke is the type of kid who is going to bust his tail. And so I don't think that there's any question in my mind that he's going to bounce back from that and put himself in a favorable position heading into the summer. So again, the question is, does that mean that Tegra Shabola and Carson Hinzman are chaseable? Are you able to pull the rug back and underneath them and move ahead, or Or is it just, I'm going to head into my second year and I'll be a backup? Like, he doesn't want to be a backup. I know that.
Right. All right. So one offense, one defense. Where would you go next, Berm?
This is going to sound weird because I think the expectations for him are awfully high, but I would expect that we will see Carnell Tate get to another level heading into the summer, knowing now that Jeremiah Smith is nipping at your heels, understanding that if you want the football this year with the running game the way it is, with Emeka Ibuka back and healthy, with Jeremiah Smith's emergence, a guy like Carnell Tate, who shocked everyone a year ago with his work ethic and the way he came in and really acted and played like a veteran. I think you need to see him continue to elevate and not get complacent. Not to say that he is or that I've heard that, but there is a tendency, I think, in just human nature to allow yourself to do that when you've hit a goal and you're heading into year 2 at Ohio State as a presumptive starter. But if you want to be what everyone thinks you're going to be, the guy that was being talked about as the replacement of Marvin Harrison a year ago, then you have to be able to go out there and do the things that Marvin did off the field. And so this is a pivotal couple week stretch for him, I think, to go out and just prove that Jeremiah Smith is as good as he can be, but Carnell Tate is the guy that if he's able to elevate himself, Ohio State's offense can go in a light year type or light speed type of motion moving forward, because they have all the talent, but too many guys sometimes are you look at it and like, well, I got better, but now I'll just take a deep breath. And I don't think that he's in a position where that breath can be taken right now.
Isn't it weird that we had all that conversation last year, spring training camp, Marvin with the praise, yeah, he's ahead of where I was as a true freshman, and then he had the foot injury throughout the season, and he still played a large amount. Bill and I were talking about that with his freshman snap count. It was even more than I had thought it was. He just didn't have a ton of actual receiving production to go with it, which I think was a product of that foot injury slowing him down. And it's like even Jeremiah Smith's presence has even affected the way that like Emeka Ibuka is talked about. And it has essentially pushed the Carnell Tate conversation entirely to the side, which is kind of bonkers to me.
It's kind of bonkers to me too, but I hope that seeing that will inspire Carnell to go even harder, because I think that he has NFL first round potential. He wouldn't have been recruited by Brian Hartline and everyone else in the country the way he was in the class of 2023 if that wasn't the case. But now that road gets harder, and that's the beauty of playing at a place like Ohio State. Like, you are not going to ever feel comfortable because they are going to continue to recruit great players behind you. And so if there was any sense of heading into this second season a little complacent, I would imagine that's completely eradicated. And again, I want to be clear, I'm not saying that anyone has said that. I just think that it's natural human tendency to do it. But when you look over your shoulder and you see what's coming, you got to keep going.
I think people are probably pretty tired of hearing me talk about the tight ends, but for this conversation, I feel like I have to include them anyway. If you're looking at a position group that has the most uncertainty or a question mark above it, like Jelani Thurman fits into the same criteria of what we were just talking about with Carnell Tate. Not that he's arrived, not that he's a finished product. We know for certain that his work ethic can't be questioned. We saw him doing a ton of that throughout year one, getting extra work in the Woody, extra work with that coaching staff whenever he could. Like, we know that he would take that challenge, and we know that physically he's got a frame that can take a lot more mass, a lot more strength. And I don't even know that he needs it necessarily, but I am intrigued by what that would look like if he gets 2 more months, because it feels like every time I see him, he grows another inch and gets 10 pounds stronger. So, it is fine tuning and taking the next step with everything. We've talked about the blocking. We've talked about, maybe this summer it's more, getting more routes and throwing and catching with the quarterbacks, or getting on the monarch and maybe taking another step there as a receiving target at tight end, or both and all of the above. But he's, I think, without question, the guy who has the highest NFL tight end ceiling on Ohio State's roster. He's not at that point yet. And I don't even know if it's realistic to expect him to be that by August, but I'm curious what that's going to look like for sure.
He's the guy who can change the future of that room more than anyone else. And I think that's obvious. When you look at Jelani, obviously he's huge. We've talked about it since the day he got on campus, but I don't think that he has transformed his body yet the way that maybe we would have thought for a kid in the program a year. And, if you look at him, I'm certainly not in the position to say anyone doesn't look as muscular as you didn't think that they would, considering my own, soft-bellied physique. But he is a player that we have seen Buckeyes in the past go from being baby fat to very different physical dudes in a year. And I don't think we've seen that yet. And maybe that's because his body type is just that way. And maybe it's just harder when you're that big. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but I don't know anyone else in that room who can change the fortune of the tight end room like he'll be able to if he does that. So I think that's a fine selection, a fair selection. I would also put, is because we don't know exactly where he's going to be at rehab wise, Lorenzo Styles in this conversation. I think for him at slot, we've talked so much about the value of Jordan Hancock. Bill has been pounding the table to see Jermaine Matthews in that role. I think that Lorenzo Styles Jr., whether or not it's in the slot or whether or not it's him doing what you have called for and asked for and taking over the role as the return specialist, especially with Sean Lodge coming in from Presbyterian, like there's now competition to be that guy. And I think that it's an important time for Lorenzo to put himself on the map. And he's obviously one of the hardest workers on the team. Everyone loves him, but you got to be able to go out there and put it on the field. And he didn't really get a chance to do that a year ago, coming in, transitioning positions, etc. Now the opportunity is yours. And I think it just absolutely sucks for the kid that he had to have a procedure done at the end of spring that is going to, by really no fault of his own, force him to go even harder than he's had to what he did in the last year. So again, though, the beauty of this program and the beauty of what Ohio State has is that there is no shortage of people who are willing to work, and Lorenzo is going to be that guy. But it is a pivotal couple months for him.
We've also seen that in terms of work ethic and basically living at the Woody with Sonny, Lorenzo, the opportunity for the brothers to be around and they have their dad in the building with some of those workouts and stuff throughout the spring as well. So that's not going to be an issue. I don't know what the timeline is for full clearance. Hopefully that's another thing that we could get some clarity on from Ohio State in the day or week ahead. We're hoping to get that with a little update from the coaching staff, which would be great. We definitely love May content, right, Berm? We don't take days off here.
I love all content. I have no problem with doing the work. I'm actually glad to. I like when we can actually talk about football. I enjoy it. Bill's on vacation this week, right? And then you're going on vacation next week, right? Is that working? Or is it yours the end of this week? I guess it feels bad, man. When we're like, we don't take days off, and then I'm like, Bill's on vacation. Austin, you're taking days off at the end of this week. So I guess, there are no days off for me.
Well, those aren't entirely accurate dates, but we'll figure that out. And we'll be at Roosters later on today. And then we'll figure out the rest of what's coming on the podcast daily Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday from there. Yeah. It's a little thing called You'll See.
Yeah, keep recommending topics to us, folks. Just dial the number, or don't dial it because no one's going to answer. Text the number, that we are always talking about. Join us on subtext. What is it? 614-662-4509 right there on the screen. So join us, 2-week free trial. You can tell us what you want us to talk about, and we will listen. We always listen.
And then we'll talk about it on the podcast daily. This is Monday's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. Kicking off another week for the Buckeyes and kicking off the offseason summer conditioning program. He's Berm. I'm Austin. We'll talk to you later.